Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is something deeply human about the need for answers. We look at the night sky and we ask what is out there. We dig into the ground and ask what came before. We read between the lines of every great story and ask what the author left unsaid. In the universe of Warhammer 40,000, that instinct, that ache for understanding, is not just human. It belongs to every thinking being in the galaxy. And in that galaxy, the questions outnumber the stars. Welcome back. If you are new here, settle in, pour yourself something warm, dim the lights a little. Tonight we are not going to talk about what we know. Tonight we are going to sit together in the comfortable darkness of everything that is uncertain, unanswered, and possibly unknowable. Tonight we are going to talk about the 75 greatest unsolved mysteries in the entire lore of Warhammer 40,000. This is a universe that has been built over 4 decades by thousands of writers, artists, game designers, and storytellers. It spans tens of thousands of years of in-universe history, from the War in Heaven, 60 million years before the current setting, to the fires of the Cicatrix Maledictum, cracking open the sky in what was once called the 41st Millennium. It contains gods that are not quite gods, machines that should not think but do, soldiers who are barely human anymore, and civilizations so ancient that humanity had not yet learned to walk upright when those civilizations first rose and fell. And in all of that space, across all of that time, there are gaps. Deliberate ones, some of them, accidental ones, a few, and gaps that have become so deep and so old that the characters within the story itself cannot see to the bottom of them. Those are the ones that call to us. Those are the ones we keep coming back to, turning over in our minds late at night, sketching on the margins of notebooks, arguing about in comment sections and Discord servers and hobby rooms that smell like plastic glue. What happened to the 2 missing Primarchs? What is the Emperor actually doing on the Golden Throne? Did the Tyranids come here from another galaxy, or something worse? Is Omegon still alive? Does the warp have a bottom? What is the Silent King actually planning? Why do the Watchers in the Dark exist? 75 questions. 75 places where the light of knowledge simply stops and something else begins. We will move through them carefully. What we will not rush. Some of these mysteries can be explored in a few minutes. Others open up into labyrinths that could swallow entire evenings. When we have partial answers, we will share them. When we have strong theories, we will lay them out. And when the answer is simply that nobody knows, not the writers, not the game designers, not the characters who live inside this universe, we will sit with that too. Because in a setting as rich as 40K, uncertainty is not a flaw. It is part of what makes it breathe. Let us begin. Section 2. The Mysteries of the Emperor. He is the most important figure in the entire lore. The God King of humanity, the master of mankind, the being who sits at the center of the Imperium like a spider at the heart of a galaxy-spanning web. And yet, for all of that centrality, for all of the prayers offered to him on a billion worlds, and all of the scholars who have dedicated their lives to understanding him, the Emperor of Mankind remains one of the most profoundly mysterious figures in all of fiction. Let us count the ways. Mystery 1. What is the Emperor actually doing on the Golden Throne? The official story is relatively simple. The Emperor was mortally wounded in his duel with the War Master Horus aboard the Sons of Horus flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, at the conclusion of the Horus heresy. His shattered body was placed upon the Golden Throne, an ancient device of unknown origin, unearthed from beneath the deserts of what was once Asia. The throne sustains his dying physical form and allows his mind to project the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guides Imperial ships through the madness of the warp. In 1,000 psychers are sacrificed to him every single day to maintain this arrangement. And there he sits, for over 10,000 years, neither truly alive nor truly dead. That is the official story. But the whispers in the archives, The fragments scattered across dozens of novels and codex entries suggest something considerably stranger and more terrible. The Golden Throne was not originally designed to sustain life. It was built as a device to grant access to the Eldar webway, that vast network of psychic tunnels threaded through a dimension adjacent to the warp. The Emperor, working in absolute secrecy beneath the Imperial Palace, had already begun constructing a human extension of the webway when Magnus the Red, intending to warn his father of Horus's treachery, shattered the psychic protections around the project with his forbidden sorcery. Demons poured into the human-built section of the webway. The custodian guard fought a desperate, losing battle to contain them. The Emperor was forced to take his place upon the throne, to use his own will as a psychic dam, holding back the tide of demonic entities and preventing them from flooding through the portal and destroying Terra itself. When he was finally mortally wounded and interred for good, the throne was modified to sustain his body. But here is the question that never goes away. The throne was not built for this purpose. It was jury-rigged. The Mechanicus tech priests who maintain it do not fully understand it. By the late 41st millennium, the throne's mechanisms were failing in ways that defied repair. Some fragments of lore suggest that the Mechanicus actually struck a deal with the Dark Eldar, trading billions of human lives, to gain the technical expertise needed to delay the throne's collapse. But what does the Emperor actually experience? Is he conscious, locked in an endless waking nightmare? Is his mind truly free in the warp as some claim, or is that too a comforting story? There is a dark theory that he does not simply sit on the throne, that he dies on it, endlessly, over and over, and is endlessly reborn by his nature as a perpetual, in a cycle that has lasted 10,000 years. If this is true, then every resurrection costs him something. Every death burns away another piece of what made him human. The throne does not save him. It kills him repeatedly, forever. And Vulcan, himself a perpetual, has installed something beneath the throne called the Talisman of Seven Hammers, a dead man's switch. If the throne fails completely, the talisman detonates with force enough to destroy not just the Imperial Palace, but all of Terra. The Emperor himself ordered it installed. He chose to make himself and his entire throne world a bomb, rather than let the forces of chaos take it. We do not know what he is experiencing. We may never know. But the evidence suggests that whatever it is nothing like peace. Mystery 2. Is the Emperor becoming a warp god? Consider what the Emperor is. He is the accumulated reincarnation of thousands of psychically gifted shamans from humanity's prehistoric past, who sacrificed themselves collectively to create a being who could guide their species through the psychic dangers of the far future. He is the most powerful human psyker who has ever lived. He has spent over 10,000 years as a half-dead consciousness, soaking in the warp, sustained by the daily sacrifice of thousands of souls. He has had the focused religious devotion of trillions of human beings directed at his person for the entire span of that time. And he told his sons during the Great Crusade that he was not a god. He specifically forbade the worship of himself. He ordered the imperial truth, a doctrine of rationalism and secrecy about the true nature of the warp, to be spread across the galaxy as a matter of policy. But the warp does not care about policy. The warp is shaped by belief. The chaos, gods themselves, are nothing more than massive accumulations of emotion and faith made real by the psychic weight of millions of worshipping minds. Khorne did not decide to exist. He was dreamed into existence by the fear and anger and bloodlust of conscious beings across the galaxy. Slaanesh was born screaming from the excess and pleasure and cruelty of the Eldar Empire. So what is happening to the Emperor? Trillions of human beings worship him with a devotion that rivals or exceeds anything the Chaos Gods ever received. His presence in the warp is already enormous. It is what powers the Astronomicon, after all. Phenomena that have no rational explanation, like the Legion of the Damned and the miraculous survivals of individuals like Saint Celestine, seem to suggest that something is acting on his behalf in real space, something that did not exist before. Is he becoming a god? If he is, will that god be anything like the man he was? Will it be benevolent? Or will it be something new and alien, shaped by 10,000 years of suffering and isolation into something that humanity would not recognize as protective, even if it were? The Terminus Decree, recently revealed in Grey Knight's law, states explicitly that the Emperor can never be allowed to leave the Golden Throne, not return to life, not reborn in another body, not allowed to ascend as any kind of warp entity. Should any of those things occur, the Grey Knights are ordered to return him to the throne by whatever force is necessary, which means the Emperor himself, before or during his internment, anticipated the possibility that he might be reborn as something that his own warriors would need to fight. That is not a comforting thought. Mystery 3. Who or what built the Golden Throne? The Golden Throne is described as a relic of the Dark Age of technology, discovered by the Emperor in the sunken ruins beneath the deserts of ancient Asia. But even the Emperor himself was reportedly uncertain whether the idea for the device was entirely his, or whether he had been inspired by something he found, or whether something he found had, in some sense, been waiting for him. A similar device called dark glass was discovered elsewhere during the Great Crusade. The implication is that these were not the only such devices, and that whoever built them had a specific purpose in mind. But who built them? The lore points cryptically at the Old Ones, the ancient species that created the Eldar and the Orcs and seeded the galaxy with psychic life. But the Old Ones are believed to have been destroyed or driven to extinction during the War in Heaven, 60 million years before the current setting. Did they leave devices behind? Were those devices meant to be found? Was the Emperor, in some cosmically long sense, meant to be what he became? We do not know. The architects of the throne have never been confirmed. The purpose it was built for, beyond accessing the webway, remains ambiguous. And the fact that it can do what it does, sustain a consciousness in the warp for 10,000 years, project a psychic beacon visible across the entire galaxy, suggests that whoever built it understood the Imperium in ways that even the Emperor, for all his brilliance, may not have fully grasped. Mystery 4. What was the Emperor's grand plan, really? Whilst this question sits underneath all the others, the Emperor claimed he was creating the Webway project to free humanity from its dependence on the warp. He kept it secret, even from his sons. He told no one the full extent of what he was building, what he had discovered, what he intended. His closest advisor, Malcador the Sigillite, had fragments of the picture. His Primarchs had almost none of it. His soldiers had nothing at all. What was the end state? If the Webway project had succeeded, if Magnus had not shattered it, if the heresy had never come, what was supposed to happen? Was the Emperor planning to step down eventually? Was he planning to ascend to godhood in a controlled way, becoming a fifth power in the warp to counter the 4 Chaos Gods? Was he planning to seal off the warp entirely, starving the Chaos Gods of the emotion fuel they needed to sustain themselves until they simply faded away? All of these theories have some evidence. None of them are confirmed. And the terrible irony is that the man who could answer the question is neither alive enough to speak, nor dead enough to be beyond reach. He sits on his throne, and he burns, and the plan, whatever it was, may have died 10,000 years ago in the fires of the Siege of Terror. Mystery 5. Can the Emperor be reborn? For as long as there has been 40K lore, there has been the tantalizing suggestion that the Emperor might one day return. That his long dying upon the throne is not an ending, but a transformation. That the psychic energy, accumulated by 10 millennia of human worship and daily sacrifice, is building towards something. A chrysalis, not a grave. Some in-universe voices believe this. The Adeptus Custodes, who watch the throne and know better than anyone the state of the Emperor's body, reportedly do not believe simple prayer will save him. There is a more clinical question about whether the Golden Throne, as it continues to fail, will force a crisis in which the Emperor's consciousness either ascends or is destroyed. Robert Gilliman, who has spoken with the Emperor psychically and found the experience deeply unsettling, has reportedly described what he felt during that contact as something that was no longer entirely human. Would a reborn Emperor be the being who walked the galaxy 10,000 years ago? Or would it be something else, shaped by everything that happened since? Would it be something that humanity would want to return? The Grey Knights have standing orders. It's in the name of the Emperor himself, to prevent that return by force if necessary. Think very carefully about what that means. Mystery 6. How old is the Emperor? Really? The lore says he was born approximately 8,000 years before the Common Era, in what is now central Anatolia. He is described as the accumulated reincarnation of thousands of psychically gifted proto-human shamans. But the lore also suggests he has been continuously aware across all of those years, guiding human history from the shadows. If that is true, he was present for the rise and fall of every human civilization on Terra. He watched the Roman Empire. He watched the Mongols. He watched the Black Death and the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution and the Nuclear Age and the slow dying of the Earth's biosphere. He is older than recorded human history, yet he is older than the concept of writing. He may be, in some sense, older than the concept of civilization. What does that do to a mind? What kind of being does 10,000 years of cosmic burden make, let alone 20 or 30 or 40? The Emperor we see in the Horus Heresy novels is already distant, already alien in his certainty and his secrets. How much more alien must he have been before the heresy? How much more so now? We do not know. And perhaps that unknowing is itself the point. A being that old and that powerful cannot be entirely comprehensible. Some distance must remain. Some shadow must stay. Mystery 7. Did the Emperor know the heresy was coming? There is evidence, scattered through the lore like shards of a broken mirror, that the Emperor had some foreknowledge of the Horus Heresy, and that he saw it coming and chose not to prevent it, that the heresy was not a catastrophic failure of his plans, but a calculated sacrifice. The argument goes like this: the Emperor is the most powerful psyker in human history. He can see the threads of probability in the warp. If he had genuinely tried to stop the heresy, if he had not kept his Webway project secret, if he had not left Terra at a critical moment to pursue the Ulanor campaign, if he had spoken directly to Horus about the dangers of the War Master's growing corruption, he might have succeeded. But the Emperor also knew that chaos could not be defeated by force alone. He knew that the ruinous powers were fed by conflict, by death, by the very acts of war that the Imperium waged. Perhaps in some terrible calculation, as the heresy was the only path that led to a galaxy where chaos did not ultimately win. Perhaps Horus had to fall. Perhaps the Emperor had to be broken. Perhaps the sacrifice of hundreds of billions of lives, worlds, and his own physical being was the price of something that we cannot yet see because it has not yet happened. Or perhaps the Emperor simply miscalculated. Perhaps, for all his power and his age, he was wrong. Both possibilities are terrifying in their own way. Mystery 8. What did the Emperor actually promise chaos? There are hints in the lore, and they are only hints, never confirmed outright, that the Emperor, at some point in his long history, made a direct deal with the Chaos Gods, that he negotiated with the ruinous powers, that promises were exchanged. In exchange for what? We do not know. In exchange for the survival of humanity, for the ability to create the Primarchs, for time to execute his plan. Some fragment of the lore references the Emperor having communed and negotiated with the Chaos Gods and forged grand pacts with them. If this is true, and it is very much a conditional if, then what were the terms? What did the Chaos Gods get? What concession did the Emperor make that those ancient and terrible entities considered worth granting? And if a deal was struck, has it been kept? Is the Emperor's current suffering on the throne part of the terms? The idea that the Emperor, the great opponent of chaos, the being whose entire existence is dedicated to the protection of humanity from the ruinous powers, may have made a deal with those very powers at some point in the deep past. That is one of the most unsettling possibilities in all of the lore. Mystery 9. The Talisman of 7 Hammers. Will it ever be used? Vulcan placed this device beneath the Golden Throne at the Emperor's personal instruction. If the throne fails completely, if the psychic barrier holding back the demonic forces fails, if Terra itself is on the verge of falling to the warp, the talisman detonates. Everything dies. The Imperium loses its most sacred world. The forces of chaos lose their greatest prize. It is, in the lore's own terms, a galaxy-scale dead man's switch. And the question has never been resolved. Will it ever be triggered? Is this the ending that waits at the bottom of the story? Not a triumphant rebirth, not a heroic last stand, but a quiet, terrible silence as the lights go out over Terra and the device that was always the final argument makes its case. We do not know. Games Workshop has given no indication. The lore does not tell us. And that uncertainty, the constant low-level awareness that underneath all the battles and the politics and the drama, there is a bomb in the basement of the universe, is one of the most quietly horrifying things in 40K. Section 3. The Mysteries of the Primarchs. They were the Emperor's greatest achievement, and perhaps his greatest mistake. 20 demigod warriors, each one a masterwork of genetic and psychic engineering, each one possessing some aspect of the Emperor's own immense personality and power. They led armies of millions across the galaxy, lit up the Great Crusade, shaped the early Imperium in their own images, and then, in the space of a few terrible years, the Horus heresy tore them apart. 9 turned traitor. 1 died loyal before the war began. The others fought and bled and bore what the war asked of them. And in the aftermath, most of them vanished. They are the second great field of mystery in this setting, and the questions they leave behind are many. Mystery 10. Who were the 2 lost Primarchs? We have to begin here. This is the oldest, deepest, most beloved mystery in all of 40K lore. There were 20 Primarchs. In the halls of the Imperial Palace on Terra, 20 great statues were raised to honor them. 2 of those pedestals stand empty, their features erased, their names stripped from every record in the Imperium, with a thoroughness that suggests not just censure but genuine terror, the fear of what would happen if anyone remembered. In the 2nd Legion, the 11th Legion, their Primarchs existed. They took part in the Great Crusade. They had battle brothers, campaigns, accomplishments. And then, before the Horus heresy began, the records indicate at least 43 years before the drop site massacre on Istvan Farth, they were gone. Not fallen to chaos, not reclassified as traitors, just gone, expunged, purged so completely that the surviving Primarchs, both loyalist and traitor alike, agreed to suppress their own memories of their lost brothers. Think about that. Fulgrim, who became a demon prince. Lorgar, who brought chaos to the galaxy. Angron, the literal embodiment of rage and bloodshed. All of them kept silent. All of them carried some knowledge of what happened to the 2nd and the 11th, and refused, for over 10,000 years, to speak of it. Yet whatever the 2 lost Primarchs did, it was serious enough to earn the silence of beings who are otherwise not known for restraint. We have fragments. Lorgar mentions them once, obliquely, in a way that implies he fears a similar fate. Sanguinius agonizes over the Blood Angel's genetic flaw, the red thirst and the black rage, and says he would not see a 3rd empty plinth in the hegemon as the only memorial to his legion. The Ultramarines swelled dramatically in numbers at around the same time the 2 legions disappeared. leading to the heavily supported theory that their surviving Astartes were simply absorbed, mind-wiped, and redistributed. Someone named only Subject 11 is confirmed to be imprisoned deep beneath the Imperial Palace in the dark cells maintained by the custodian guard. And whether that refers to the 11th Primarch is never confirmed. Rick Priestley, one of the original creators of 40K, has said he created the Lost Legions to give the setting mysteries that could never be answered. And for decades, Games Workshop has honored that intent. The blank spaces, the redacted entries, the long black marks over names that might tell us everything. What did they do? Gene seed failure, destroying the Legion from within, discovery of something that could not be permitted to become known, a crime against the ideals of the Great Crusade so severe that even the Chaos God's servants stayed quiet about it. Direct contact with something in the warp that the Emperor could not allow to survive. We do not know. The answer, if it ever comes, will shake the entire lore. Until then, those two empty pedestals stand in the Hall of Heroes, and the dust that settles on them is the dust of everything that was deliberately forgotten. Mystery 11. Is Alpharius still alive? The Primarch of the Alpha Legion, or rather, the twin Primarchs, Alpharius and Omegon, a secret that only the Legion itself knew, is among the most complex figures in the Horus heresy. The Alpha Legion fought for Horus during the Civil War, but not, apparently, for the reasons everyone assumed. They had been approached by a mysterious organization called the Cabal, a multi-species alliance that showed Alpharius visions of the future. In those visions, if the Emperor won the heresy, humanity would endure, but for 10,000 more years of slow decay until chaos consumed everything anyway. If Horus won, humanity would be annihilated within 2 generations, but the annihilation would destroy chaos along with it, saving the rest of the galaxy. Alpharius, in his own inscrutable way, chose to back Horus, not because he wanted to, but because, according to the Cabal's logic, it was the only path that actually defeated chaos. Rogel Dawn killed Alpharius during the Battle of Pluto. Except then, Alpharius appeared again, alive and well, later in the campaign. Guilliman killed Alpharius after the heresy, except the circumstances around that death are equally murky, and significant portions of the Alpha Legion believe it was Omegon who died, not Alpharius, or that it was neither of them, and the whole affair was staged for reasons only the Legion's architect knows. The Alpha Legion's entire doctrine is built around deception. They routinely have their own soldiers adopt the name and identity of Alpharius, making it impossible for outsiders to identify the real Primarch. Every battle the Legion fights is potentially a misdirection. Every piece of intelligence about Alpharius is potentially disinformation. Is he alive in the 41st millennium, moving through the shadows, still executing some plan so long-term that even his own soldiers can only see fragments of it? Is Omegon alive somewhere, quietly working for the loyalist cause as the Cabal intended? Or are they both truly dead, and the Legion simply carries the myth forward? All we know is that the Alpha Legion still fights, and it still says, with every battle cry, "I am Alpharius." That statement is either a piece of theatre, or it is a truth deeper than most of us understand. At Mystery 12, what is Vulcan doing? Vulcan is a perpetual, one of a rare category of humans who cannot permanently die. He heals from anything. He returns from anything. He was tortured by the Night Haunter repeatedly during the heresy, killed and revived in cycles of deliberate cruelty, and each time he came back. He was eventually given what might have been a true death by a piece of fulgurite, and then came back from that too. After the heresy, Vulcan led his legion, eventually renamed the Salamander's Chapter, for what the lore suggests was approximately 3,000 years. He guided them through the long rebuilding. He left behind a text called the Tome of Fire, which described 9 artifacts of Vulcan hidden across the galaxy for his chapter to find as a test of their worthiness. And then he left. No declaration, no farewell. Yet he simply walked away from everything and vanished. 5 of the 9 artifacts have been recovered by the Salamanders as of the current in-universe timeline. The chapter treats the role of chapter master as a regency, a placeholder position held until Vulcan returns. Because they believe he will return. They believe that when all 9 artifacts are found, he will come back. Where is he now? What is he doing? Is he wandering the galaxy in disguise, watching over humanity in some quiet way? Did he find some other conflict to fight, something that called him louder than the pull of his old legion? Did his nature as a perpetual eventually take him somewhere that the law has not yet thought to look? He is, by all accounts, one of the most genuinely good beings in the entire setting. A Primarch who actually loved the ordinary people his army was supposed to protect. The idea that he is out there somewhere, still alive, still caring, is one of the few warmly hopeful mysteries in a setting that does not offer many. Mystery 13. What happened at Caliban? Really? The Dark Angels are, as a chapter, defined by a secret they have spent 10,000 years trying to keep. After the heresy, their Primarch Lion, L. Johnson, returned to his homeworld of Caliban, only to find his second-in-command, Luther, and the Dark Angels garrison had turned against him. The two sides fought. The orbital bombardment from the Loyalist fleet above and the psychic energies of the battle below tore the planet apart, sending it spiraling into the warp. Luther was left alive, while his mind shattered. The Lion disappeared into the debris, apparently dying, but the Watchers in the dark, those silent, shrouded beings who have always attended the Dark Angels, took him somewhere, into a hidden chamber within what remained of Caliban, now called the Rock. For 10,000 years he slept there. He has recently awakened, returned to the setting of the 42nd Millennium. But the question has always been, what actually happened? Why did Luther rebel? The official story is that he was corrupted by chaos, that the dark gods whispered promises and he listened. But there are fragments that suggest something more complicated, that Luther felt genuinely, justifiably betrayed, that the Lion had kept secrets from him, that there was something the Lion knew about Caliban, about the Order, about what Luther was and had always been. How that Luther discovered. And that discovery broke something between them that could not be repaired. What did the Lion know? What did Luther discover? And what, exactly, is the inner circle of the Dark Angels still hiding from the rest of the Imperium, even now, after 10,000 years? Mystery 14. Is Omegon secretly loyal? Separate from the question of whether Alpharius still lives, there has long been the question of whether Omegon, the hidden twin, chose a different path. The Cabal showed both of them the same visions, but visions are interpretable. What if one twin came away from that experience believing one thing, and the other came away believing something different? What if Omegon decided that the path to defeating chaos was not to back Horus, but to quietly work against the Alpha Legion's own apparent allegiance, steering events toward the Emperor's victory? There is some textual evidence for this. During the heresy, the Alpha Legion did things that benefited the Loyalists. They delayed forces, allowed messages to get through, maneuvered circumstances in ways that look less like enthusiasm for Horus, and more like someone who wants Horus to lose, but does not want to say so. Whether this was Omegon's work, or simply the Alpha Legion playing both sides for reasons only they understand, has never been resolved. In the current setting, elements of the Alpha Legion still fight against chaos. They use the battle cry for the Emperor. There are Alpha Legionnaires who claim, with apparent sincerity, to be loyal servants of terror. Are they deceiving? Is that exactly what an Alpha Legionnaire would say regardless of the truth? Or is there something real underneath the misdirection? Hydra Dominatus. And no, you will never fully know what that means. Mystery 15. Why did the Rangdan Xenocides get erased? Before the Horus heresy, before even the main body of the Great Crusade, there was a conflict called the Rangdan Xenocides. The Dark Angels took such grievous losses that they were for a time eclipsed in numbers by the Ultramarines. Some references suggest that entire Space Marine legions, possibly the two Lost Legions, were destroyed or lost during this conflict. The enemy called the Rangdan was apparently so terrifying that knowledge of them was suppressed, with near the same thoroughness applied to the lost Primarchs. What were the Rangdan? Why were they so dangerous that the memory of the conflict had to be erased? Is the threat genuinely ended? Or did the suppression of information simply mean that the threat was filed away, marked as dealt with, and quietly left as something that might come back? This is a mystery that has only grown more intriguing as the Horus Heresy novel series has expanded the pre-heresy setting. References accumulate without resolution. The Rangdan remain a dark space in the timeline, a war that was worse than the records suggest, fought against something worse than the record's name, at a cost worse than anyone has admitted. Mystery 16. What are the Watchers in the dark? The Dark Angels have always been accompanied by small, robed beings who go by this name. They do not speak. They carry relics. They move with uncanny purpose. They were on Caliban before the Legion came. They may have been on Caliban before humanity arrived at all. When Luther and the Lion fought and the planet was torn apart, it was the Watchers who preserved the Lion and kept him hidden for 10,000 years. What are they? The lore is carefully vague. They appear to be connected to the warp in some way, but they do not read as psychic. They read as something older, something from before. Some theories connect them to the Perpetuals, beings who cannot die. Others suggest they are remnant entities from the old ones. Others still argue that they are something connected specifically to Caliban's own dark history, entities that attach themselves to the Lion for reasons that serve their own inscrutable purpose. The Dark Angels treat them with reverence, but not full trust. They are helpful. They are cryptic. They clearly know things that nobody else knows. And in 10,000 years of accumulated lore, they have never been explained. Mystery 17. What is Cypher ultimately planning? Cypher is one of the most persistent enigmas in 40K. He is a fallen angel, one of the Dark Angels from the garrison left on Caliban, who turned against the Lion when Luther rebelled. He carries 2 plasma pistols, one of which he never fires. He has survived for over 10,000 years. He moves through the galaxy with a freedom that seems to laugh at the Imperium's borders. He has worked alongside Chaos warbands, Inquisitorial teams, Space Marine strike forces, Imperial Guard units, and stranger allies still. He was once captured and brought before the High Lords of Terror. He escaped. The plasma pistol he never fires. The suggestion in the lore is that it once belonged to the Lion. That Cypher is carrying the Lion's sword, or something he believes can only be given to the Lion himself. That whatever Cypher's plan is, its end goal is to place something in the Emperor's hands. Is he seeking absolution? Is he trying to close a loop that began on Caliban 10,000 years ago? Does he believe that what he carries will somehow change the fate of the Emperor, or the Lion, or the Dark Angels, or the galaxy itself? Nobody knows. Not even, it is implied, Cypher himself, in the sense that his path is defined by a faith in his own purpose that he cannot fully articulate. He walks on, he evades, he watches, and the pistol stays in its holster. Mystery 18. What exactly is the flaw in Sanguinius's gene seed? The Blood Angels carry a darkness within them that their Primarch carried first. The red thirst, a craving for blood that grows stronger under stress and combat. The black rage, a psychic echo of Sanguinius's final moments. The sight of his death at the hands of Horus that overwhelms the mind and leaves a Space Marine reliving the Primarch's last battle as if it were their own. Sanguinius knew about it. He spent the Great Crusade trying to manage it, hide it, prevent his legion from being judged and purged, as the 2 lost legions had been. He took the secret to his death, but the question the lore has never fully answered is, why does the flaw exist at all? Gene seed flaws in other legions have explanations. Russ's Space Wolves have a mutation that can trigger lycanthropic transformation. because of something in Fenrisian biology. The Night Lords have documented neurological issues. But the Blood Angel's flaw seems connected specifically to psychic resonance, to the warp, to something about Sanguinius's unique nature as a being who could see the future. Was the flaw always there, part of the original design? Or did something happen to Sanguinius that created it? An event in the warp, a contact with something that left a mark, not just on him, but on every space marine who would ever carry his genetic legacy. And will it ever be cured? With the Sanguinor, with Aeneid, with whatever force the blood of Sanguinius still calls to from wherever his soul ended up. Is there a path forward for the Blood Angels that doesn't involve endless management of a wound that never fully heals? Section 4. The Hidden Depths of the Horus Heresy. The Horus Heresy is the central event of the setting, and everything that matters in the 41st millennium either directly resulted from those 9 years of civil war, or was shaped by their aftermath. But for all of the extraordinary detail poured into those events by the Black Library novel series, there remain questions, fundamental ones, that have still not been answered. Mystery 19. What exactly did Horus experience during the Chaos Ritual on Davin? Before the heresy began, Horus was wounded on the moon of Davin by a chaos-tainted blade. He was brought to a temple of the Serpent Lodge, where a ritual was performed to heal him. What happened to him inside that ritual? What he experienced in whatever psychic or spiritual space his consciousness was taken to, changed him completely. The official answer is that he was shown visions of the future by the Chaos Gods, and that he was shown an Imperium where the Emperor had ascended to godhood, where the Primarchs were worshipped as lesser saints, where Horus himself was reduced to a footnote in a mythology he had helped create. That this vision of irrelevance and divinity without consent was what turned him. But the lore has always left room for the possibility that what Horus saw was not entirely false. That the visions were true, at least in some futures, but presented in a way designed to produce the maximum damage. That Horus did not simply fall to pride and resentment. That he was genuinely trying to prevent something he believed was worse. That he was deceived, yes, but that the deception was built on a scaffolding of real truth. What was he actually shown? What was real and what was manufactured? And is there any version of those events in which Horus makes a different choice? Mystery 20. Why did Magnus really destroy the webway protections? Magnus the Red is a complicated figure. He was the Emperor's most gifted son, a psyker of staggering power, a man who loved knowledge more than caution and paid for it catastrophically. The official account is that he used forbidden sorcery to break through the psychic protections around Terra and warn the Emperor of Horus's treachery, that the warning was sincere, but the method was ruinous, destroying the psychic wards that protected the Emperor's webway project and sending everything into chaos. But Magnus is also a Primarch who had visions, who could see threads of probability in the warp, who had communed directly with powers in the Imperium. Did he not foresee what would happen when he cast that spell? Did he not understand what it would cost? Some theories hold that Magnus knew exactly what he was doing, that he had been shown a vision in which the heresy was inevitable regardless, in which the only path that avoided absolute catastrophe required the webway project to be destroyed before the heresy could use it. Others believe that Magnus was himself manipulated, that Tzeentch guided his hand with perfect precision because the destruction of the webway project was necessary to ensure the Emperor would be trapped on the throne, and that the Emperor on the throne was necessary to ensure something that Tzeentch needed. Is Magnus a tragic victim?
You know, I've been sitting with this list for a while, and the one that genuinely keeps me up at night is the Lost Primarchs. Not because it's the most consequential mystery. The Emperor's fate probably wins that category, but because of what it says about the setting itself. The fact that the other Primarchs, loyalists and traitors alike, agreed to forget that it wasn't just censor, it was grief. And you get the scene that whatever happened to the 2nd and the 11th was something that broke everyone who witnessed it in a way that war and betrayal simply could not. Every other tragedy in the heresy has a name and a cause and a villain. This one has silence, and for me, that silence hits harder than any battle scene ever could. And that's what I love most about 40K. But anyways, that's just my take. Let's go back to the video.
A manipulated tool. A man who made the wrong choice in a genuine emergency. Or did he, on some level? Choose the path that led to everything that followed. His current existence as a demon prince of Tzeentch, return to the setting and leading his 1,000 sons, has not clarified the question at all. He remains difficult to read, which is, of course, entirely appropriate for a servant of the Changer of Ways. Mystery. 21. What was Malcador's full role? Malcador the Sigillite was the Emperor's closest advisor, the second most powerful human psyker in history, and the man who sat on the Golden Throne, in the Emperor's place, briefly, while the Emperor went to face Horus, and was destroyed by the experience. He held the throne for what the lore suggests was only hours. It killed him. He died in the Emperor's place. But Malcador also had a secret project of his own. He assembled the founding members of the Grey Knights, at the Brotherhood of Psykers, who would become the Imperium's foremost defense against demonic incursion. He chose them personally, from among the most gifted and trustworthy psykers available, and placed them at the heart of the Titan's Bane, one of the great vaults beneath the Imperial Palace. How much did Malcador know? How much was his work guided by the Emperor's instruction, and how much was his own initiative? Was the creation of the Grey Knights part of the Emperor's plan? One of the pieces placed before the board was set for the heresy? Or did Malcador make that call himself, seeing what was coming and doing what he could to prepare? And when he died on the throne, what happened to him? Where does a mind like his go when it burns out in the heart of the most powerful psychic amplifier in human history? A mystery. 22. Who is the Sanguinor? The Sanguinor is an entity associated with the Blood Angels, a golden figure in the likeness of Sanguinius that appears on the battlefield when hope is failing and the Blood Angels have their greatest need. He fights with the power and grace of a Primarch. He appears without warning. He disappears without trace. The in-universe explanations range from a genuinely surviving fragment of Sanguinius's soul, preserved in the warp, to an aspect of the Emperor's will given specific form, to something created by the warp itself in response to the Blood Angels' collective faith in their lost father. None of these explanations have been confirmed. The Sanguinor offers no clarification. He simply appears, fights, and leaves. Is this the soul of Sanguinius? Is it something Sanguinius created before his death, a final gift to his sons? Is it a warp entity of a kind the Imperium does not have categories for? Something benevolent that does not fit into the binary of daemon versus saint? We have no answer. The golden figure keeps appearing. The Blood Angels keep surviving battles they should have lost. And the mystery persists, quietly golden, quietly hopeful, quietly unanswered. Mystery 23. What was the chaos? God's full plan during the heresy. The heresy is usually understood as a catastrophe engineered by the ruinous powers, using Horus as their instrument to destroy the Emperor before his plan could come to fruition. But the execution of the heresy is strange in some ways. The Chaos Gods did not pursue maximum efficiency. Well, they gave Horus enormous power, but also surrounded him with advisors and allies whose interests frequently conflicted. Lorgar's agenda was different from Tzeentch's. Nurgle's plans did not align perfectly with Horn's. The four Chaos Gods cooperated only up to the point where cooperation served each of them individually, and beyond that point, they worked against each other. Was the heresy really designed to succeed? Or was it a catastrophe engineered to fail in a specific way? One that broke the Emperor without killing him, broke the Imperium without destroying it, and left 10,000 years of exactly the kind of suffering and death and despair that feeds the warp. An Imperium on the edge, endlessly bleeding, endlessly fearing, endlessly producing the psychic nourishment that sustains the gods in the warp. If the Chaos Gods wanted to win in the conventional sense, They might have made different choices. Their choices look less like a plan for victory and more like a plan for a very particular, very extended, very profitable kind of ongoing loss. Mystery 24. What really happened in Horus's soul during the final battle? At the climax of the heresy, the Emperor teleported aboard the vengeful spirit and confronted Horus. In that final battle, Horus killed Sanguinius, who had arrived first and fought and died buying the Emperor time, and then turned his attention to the Emperor himself. What followed was a battle on both physical and psychic dimensions simultaneously. The Emperor was broken, mortally wounded. But before Horus could finish him, something happened. A human soldier, as an ordinary person named Olanius Pius, or in some versions of the story, Trooper Uriah Olathair, placed himself between Horus and the Emperor. Horus reached out with his psychic power and obliterated this person without thought. And then he stopped. In the moment of that casual, thoughtless murder, something in Horus returned. Some fragment of the man he had been before the corruption came back, looked at what he had become, looked at what he had just done, and the horror of it broke the hold the Chaos Gods had on him, at least partially. The Emperor, in that moment, struck. He poured everything he had into Horus, destroying his soul so completely that not even the Chaos Gods could reclaim it. But what was that moment in Horus's mind? When he looked at the ordinary person he had just killed without a second thought, what did he feel? Was it recognition of his own monstrousness? Was it grief for what he had lost? Was it a last fragment of the Horus who had loved his brothers and his father, rising to the surface one final time? The lore has given us partial answers in some novels, but the true interiority of that moment, the exact texture of Horus's consciousness in the seconds between casual murder and final defeat, is something we can only imagine. Mystery 25. Is any of what we know about the heresy actually true? This question sounds flip, but it is not. The Imperium of the 41st Millennium is an idiocracy built on controlled information. The true history of the Horus heresy is classified at the highest levels of the Inquisition. Most Imperial citizens know only myth and legend. Yet even Space Marines know official histories that have been curated for consumption. The Black Library novel series is presented not as objective narrative history, but as accounts compiled from multiple, often contradictory sources, filtered through narrators who have their own agendas and blind spots. How much of what we think we know about the heresy is accurate? How much has been lost, distorted, deliberately changed? The Primarchs themselves, who lived through it, had their memories suppressed in places and enhanced or modified in others. The records in the Imperial archives have been through 10,000 years of political editing. Even the Chaos sources, who have every reason to remember the heresy, have their own agendas. Was the truth of the Horus heresy, if it can be recovered at all, may look very different from any version any faction currently holds. Mystery 26. What is the beast inside Angron? Angron the Red Angel, the Primarch of the World Eaters, was found on the planet Nuceria as a slave gladiator. The device implanted in his brain, the butcher's nails, was designed to amplify aggression and suppress everything else. Fear, love, mercy, memory. Everything that was not rage was gradually burned away by the nails. The Emperor could have removed them. He chose not to. He took Angron from Nuceria before his gladiatorial brothers, who had fought beside him for years, could mount the rebellion they had been planning together. He left those people behind. He dragged Angron away at the moment of their liberation and gave him a legion instead. Angron never forgave this, and the nails kept burning through his mind, year by year, eroding whatever the Emperor's genetic work had built. By the time of the heresy, he was barely coherent in any conventional sense. He was rage with a body. He fell to Horn not because he chose to serve the blood god, but because there was almost nothing left of him that could make a different choice. But fragments of who he was keep surfacing. the man who loved his gladiatorial family, the fighter who was building something on Nuceria before the Emperor intervened. There is a being of extraordinary complexity buried under the rage, a being who deserved better than what he received, and that being is gone, replaced by a demon of burning fury. What would Angron have been if the Emperor had made a different choice on Nuceria? What is lost when we lose him? Mystery. 27. What are the Grey Knights, in their deepest nature? The Grey Knights are, officially, Space Marines who specialize in fighting demonic forces. They were created by Malcador and founded in secrecy beneath the Imperial Palace. Their exact gene seed origin is not publicly known. Their existence is classified. The Inquisition has at times committed atrocities to keep that existence secret, killing Imperial Guard regiments that simply had the misfortune of seeing Grey Knights in action. But the deeper mystery is what the Grey Knights actually are in psychic terms. They are, according to the law, soul-bound to the Emperor in a way that no other Space Marines are. They carry a measure of his will. They are, in some sense, not just soldiers, but something closer to agents of the Emperor's consciousness, acting in real space while his body sits inert on the throne. Are the Grey Knights, in some sense, extensions of the Emperor's mind? Is their presence in the 41st millennium a sign that he still has some degree of agency, some ability to act through chosen instruments? And if so, what does it mean that one of his standing orders, contained in the Terminus Decree, is for those very instruments to stop him if he tries to return? Section 5. The Xenos Enigmas. Humanity is not alone in the galaxy. It never was. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is crowded with civilizations, some vastly older than humanity, some vastly more powerful, and some so different that the concept of comparison breaks down entirely. And each of those civilizations carries its own mysteries. Mystery 28. Where did the Tyranids really come from? This is perhaps the largest Xenos mystery in the setting. The Tyranids arrived at the edge of the Milky Way galaxy in the 745th year of the 41st millennium. But the Inquisition has records suggesting isolated Tyranid contact going back to the 35th millennium. A hive ship crashed on an ice world at some point more than 7,000 years before official first contact, suggesting that the Tyranids had a presence in the galaxy far earlier than the current narrative suggests. The official position is that the Tyranids are extragalactic, that they came from somewhere beyond the Milky Way, crossing the vast void between galaxies, drawn toward the Astronomican's psychic beacon. Yet the theory most commonly advanced is that they exhausted the biomass of another galaxy and set out in search of fresh feeding grounds. The hive fleets that have struck humanity, Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, and the others, are generally understood to be leading tendrils of a main body that has not yet arrived. But where did they come from, originally? Did they evolve naturally, and if so, where? Were they created? The Old Ones designed the orcs as weapons of war. Could a sufficiently advanced civilization have designed the Tyranids for a purpose? Population control, galactic sanitization, something else entirely? Is the hive mind genuinely an alien intelligence? Or is it something that was set in motion long ago and has been running on its original programming ever since? Or, and perhaps most terrifyingly, if what has arrived so far is just the leading edge, how large is the main body? What happens when everything that the fleets have learned from their battles against humanity, against the Eldar, against the Necrons, gets fed back into the full mass of the hive mind and something larger and more perfectly adapted comes through? Mystery 29. What is the hive mind's true goal? The Tyranids consume biomass. That is the surface-level answer. They strip planets of every living thing, break it down into its component genetic and biological material, incorporate useful adaptations, and move on. The hive mind that directs them is described as a gestalt psychic consciousness of unimaginable scale and complexity. But the few individuals who have managed to make contact with the hive mind and survived, a list that is extremely short, have come away shaken in ways that go beyond what simple consumption would produce. Tigurius of the Ultramarines, the only known human psyker who has looked into the hive mind and retained his sanity, has never fully described what he found. Chapter Master Dante of the Blood Angels, who perceived the soul of the hive mind through the Swarm Lord, reportedly felt pity for it, that the hunger of the hive mind made the Blood Angel's own red thirst look trivial by comparison. Is the hive mind simply hungry? Is it, in some sense, suffering? Is there a consciousness behind the endless consuming that has any relationship to what we would recognize as desire, or fear, or need? Mars, the lore suggests it can feel anger. It has seemingly targeted the Blood Angels specifically in retaliation for their repeated defeats of Tyranid forces during the devastation of Baal. That implies something more than mechanical consumption. That implies something that registers defeat and responds to it personally. What does the hive mind want? In whatever way a being like that can want something? We cannot answer. The Tyranids cannot tell us. And the distance between what they are and what we are may be too vast to bridge. Mystery. 30. What are the Necrons actually planning? The Necrons are waking up. After 60 million years of dreamless sleep in their stasis tombs, the great dynasties are beginning to stir, assess the state of the galaxy, and prepare for the reconquest they planned before the Great Sleep began. The Silent King, Sarek, returned to the galaxy after millions of years of self-imposed exile and is now coordinating the Necron response to the emergence of the Great Rift. But what does Sarek actually want? The official position is that the Necrons desire three things: to reclaim dominion over the galaxy, to reverse the process of biotransference and restore their organic bodies, and to sever the material universe from the warp permanently, eliminating both the Chaos Gods and the source of all psychic power, at the cost of killing or transforming every psychically active species in the galaxy. The Necron pylons, great structures of blackstone that can suppress and seal warp activity, were the tools designed for this purpose. Almost the destruction of the Cadian pylons during the 13th Black Crusade was a catastrophe not just for the Imperium, but for any plan that depended on those pylons being intact. But is the Silent King's stated plan his real plan? He spent millions of years in exile, watching the galaxy from outside its rim. He saw something out there that reportedly convinced him to come home. What did he see? What is approaching from the intergalactic void that made him decide the Necrons' internal quarrels could wait, that unity was more important than dominance? The lore suggests it may be Tyranid-related. The Tyranids are anathema to the warp, and the Necrons are similarly immune to psychic influence, suggesting a potential conflict between them that could reshape the galaxy. But the specifics of what Sarek saw, what it means, and what he is actually building toward remain in shadow. Mystery 31. Are any C'tan still fully intact? After the war in heaven, the Necrons rebelled against their C'tan masters and shattered most of them into fragments. C'tan shards, which are imprisoned in Tesseract labyrinths and deployed as living weapons on the battlefield. But the lore has never confirmed that all C'tan were destroyed. Some were obliterated completely. Some were sharded. But the number that existed before the war in heaven and the number of known shards afterward do not perfectly add up. Is there a C'tan somewhere that is still fully intact, still in its original unfragmented form? A being of that power, operating freely in the material universe without any Necron control, would be one of the most dangerous entities imaginable. On the C'tan that were sharded are terrifying enough. A complete C'tan would be something else entirely. There are hints in the lore that something matching this description may be present on Mars, that one of the great powers beneath the surface of humanity's most sacred forge world is a C'tan, or a C'tan fragment of unusual size and coherence. What it is doing there, whether the Mechanicus knows about it, and what would happen if it ever broke free, have never been fully explored. Mystery 32. What happened to the Eldar pantheon? The Eldar, before their fall, had a rich pantheon of gods. Asurian, the phoenix king, Isha, the goddess of healing, Cain, the war god, Vol, the smith, Segorach, the laughing god, and others. When Slaanesh was born screaming from the psychic wreckage of the Eldar Empire, the new god consumed most of the divine beings in the Eldar pantheon almost instantly. Isha was supposedly captured and imprisoned by Nurgle, the plague lord, who keeps her as a prisoner in his gardens in the warp, offering her plague and disease, and she cures those diseases and whispers the cures to mortals, which is why medical knowledge exists in the 40K setting. This is one of the stranger and more poignant details in the lore. Cain was apparently broken by Slaanesh, his essence shattered across every infinity circuit of every surviving craft world, which is why the Eldar have the avatars of Cain, physical manifestations of that broken divine essence. He is not dead. He is imprisoned in pieces. But Asurian, Vol, the others, what became of the gods who neither escaped nor were captured? Are there fragments of them somewhere in the warp? Did some of them simply cease to exist? Did they merge into something new in the chaos of the fall? The Eldar do not talk about this openly. The wounds of the fall are 10,000 years old and still raw, and the silence around the elder gods who simply vanished is profound. Mystery. 33. What is Kegorach's plan? The Laughing God is one of the few members of the Elder Pantheon who survived the fall largely intact. Segorach was always the trickster, the outsider, the clown who observed the divine court from an angle everyone else found uncomfortable. When Slaanesh came, Segorach ran into the webway, into the spaces between spaces, into whatever dimensions the Laughing God uses as his domain. He survived. He endures. He guides the Harlequins. He maintains the Black Library of Chaos, the repository of all knowledge about chaos hidden within the webway. And recently, the crystal tome at the heart of the Black Library opened, revealing writing that claimed to be from Segorach himself, describing a final act, a performance, a jest on a galactic scale that could somehow trick Slaanesh into expending all of her power to save the Eldar rather than destroy them. What is this plan? How can a divine being be tricked? What would it mean for Slaanesh to save the Eldar? What happens to the Eldar if it succeeds? Do they transcend the warp? Does Inead, the Eldar god of the dead, come into full being? Does this have implications for the soul of Sanguinius, who died fighting chaos, and whose soul is said to be in some kind of custody arrangement between the warp and the material universe? Segorach is laughing. He is always laughing. And the joke, as always, is that we can see the punchline coming and still cannot figure out what it means. Mystery 34. What are the Blackstone Fortresses? The Blackstone Fortresses, enormous weapons platforms of ancient, unclear origin, are made of a material called noctilith, or blackstone, which can either channel or block the warp depending on how it is arranged. The Necrons built the Cadian pylons of blackstone. The Eldar call the fortresses the talismans of Vol. The Men of Iron, ancient artificial intelligences from the dark age of technology, apparently regard them as divine objects. Nobody knows who built the fortresses. Nobody knows whether the Eldari made them, or found them, or merely named them after their own god of craftsmanship. And they appear sentient in some undefined way. They can be used to destroy Satan. They were the instruments of a weapon that could threaten stars. And there are only a limited number of them remaining. Each one that is lost changes the balance of the galaxy in ways that are not fully understood. Abaddon has seized several. The Imperium has lost access to others. Whatever they were built to do, whatever their final purpose, the end state they were designed to achieve, is something that no living being in the galaxy currently comprehends. Mystery 35. Are the Orcs actually the galaxy's greatest threat? This is a question that gets asked quietly, in corners, by scholars of the Imperium who do not want to cause panic. On the surface, the Orcs are comic. brutal and simple and noisy. The setting's great joke faction are always charging forward with rusty weapons and foolish confidence. But the numbers are staggering. The orcs are literally everywhere in the galaxy. They do not have a home territory to defend or lose. They do not have infrastructure to damage. They reproduce by spreading fungal spores that germinate into more orcs, regardless of what happens to the population they came from. Killing every orc on a world does not stop more orcs from growing there decades later. Their collective psychic field, the gestalt power that makes their technology work and warps reality around them when they gather in sufficient numbers, grows stronger as their populations grow. A large enough gathering of orcs becomes a self-sustaining force that draws in more orcs from across the galaxy like a psychic whirlpool, building toward what they call the Great Warboss's final campaign. Gazg-Kul Mag-Uruk Thraka, the prophet of Gork and Mork, is reportedly building towards something called the Ragnarok, a final, apocalyptic gathering of every orc in the galaxy into a single, unified, unstoppable tide. If that gathering ever fully coheres, if the psychic gestalt of billions upon billions of orcs reaches its theoretical maximum, what does it look like? What does the galaxy look like on the other side of that? The answer is probably not something anyone would enjoy. Mystery 36. What is the true origin of the pariah gene? There exist, scattered among the human population, individuals called blanks, nulls, or pariahs, people who have no presence in the warp whatsoever. They are psychic voids. They do not register in the Imperium. Demons cannot possess them. Psychers find them profoundly disturbing, even painful to be near. The lore once suggested that the Necron Citan, called the Deceiver, had deliberately introduced the pariah gene into the human gene pool, specifically to create beings who could combat psychic threats. This was later retconned. Or was it? The retcon is sometimes described as incomplete, or as misdirection, or as exactly the kind of thing the Deceiver would want people to believe. Sisters of Silence, the Emperor's personal null units, carry this gene in concentrated form. The Calexus assassins of the Officio Assassinorum are the most extreme examples of the blank phenomenon known. And the Sensei, a rumored group of immortal warriors said to be the Emperor's unacknowledged sons, are also described in some sources as having null-type properties. If the gene was deliberately introduced, what was the purpose? Was it a gift to humanity against the predators of the warp? Or was it a weapon being built over millennia, waiting for a moment when it could be deployed against the very species it was seeded into? Section 6. The Chaos Gods and the Warp. The Immaterium is the Sea of Souls, the psychic mirror of the material universe, the place where emotion becomes substance and belief becomes being. The Chaos Gods swim in it, and they, for all their terrible power, have their own mysteries. Mystery 37. How old are the Chaos Gods, really? The four Chaos Gods, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzientch, and Slaanesh, are beings outside time. The warp does not experience linear causality. Events do not happen in sequence there the way they do in real space, which means the question of when the Chaos Gods were born is genuinely complicated. Slaanesh is the easiest, born definitively at the moment of the fall of the Eldar in the 29th millennium by the imperial calendar. This is as close to a confirmed birth date as the lore has for any of the Chaos Gods. Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzientch are far more ambiguous. The conventional understanding is that they formed gradually as the emotional content of sapient life accumulated in the warp over millions of years. First stirrings during the war in heaven, growing stronger as more and more psychically active species lived and died and felt and suffered. But the warp is a causal. The Chaos Gods may experience themselves as having always existed, regardless of when they actually came into being. They may look back on the war in heaven are 60 million years ago and feel that they were present, and from their perspective, they may be right. This is not mere philosophical hair-splitting. If Tzeentch, the changer of ways, exists outside time, then his plans are not plans in any sense we can understand. They are patterns that are simultaneously being enacted and already completed. He is not scheming toward a goal. He is already at the goal and scheming at the same time. Understanding what Tzeentch wants is impossible, partly because wanting implies a future state that does not yet exist, and for Tzeentch, all states may already exist. Mystery. 38. Is there a fifth chaos god? There are 4 ruinous powers, 4 gods of chaos, 4 great powers in the warp, 4 ancient and terrible intelligences that feed on the emotions of mortal beings. As the number 4 has become almost definitional to chaos in the 40K setting, but there have always been suggestions that the number is not fixed. In the very early lore, there was a 5th chaos god called Malal, sometimes called Malice, the god of self-destruction and anarchy, the chaos god of chaos itself. Malal was eventually dropped from the canonical lore due to intellectual property issues, but he left traces, references in texts, a sense that the lore itself knows something is missing. More recently, the demon prince Vashtor the Archifane has been introduced, a being who has grown powerful enough to be approaching true dark godhood, who supplies weapons and demon engines to all 4 of the chaos gods equally, and who the 4 great powers dare not destroy because it would benefit their rivals too much. Is Vashtor becoming a 5th chaos god? Is his ascension something the lore is building toward? And there is Iniad, the Eldar god of the dead, partially awakened, brought into being by the efforts of Ivrain and the Inari. Iniad draws power from the souls of the dead, and since the warp holds the souls of every sentient being who has ever lived, Iniad is theoretically capable of becoming enormously powerful. But Iniad is not chaos. Iniad is explicitly positioned as an enemy of Slaanesh, a counter to the entity that consumes Eldar souls. Could Iniad become a power in the warp comparable to the chaos gods? The number 4 may not be sacred. It may simply be what the lore currently holds. Mystery. 39. Does Tzeentch have an endgame? Tzeentch is the changer of ways. He is change itself, mutation, manipulation, and the endless transformation of all things into all other things. His plots spiral within plots, each one serving multiple purposes simultaneously, each one contributing to outcomes that even his own followers cannot predict. He is the great architect of a grand design that no one, not even other chaos gods, can fully see. But here is the question that has always lurked at the edge of Tzeentch's domain. If change is what he is, what does winning look like? If all things change, and he is the embodiment of change, what happens if he achieves absolute dominance? Doesn't a universe of pure Tzeentchian chaos eventually become static? If everything is changing all the time, has anything actually changed? The in-universe philosophical position, acknowledged even by some of Tzeentch's own demons, is that Tzeentch does not actually want to win. He wants the game. He wants the competition, the scheming, the endless complexity of a galaxy full of conflicting powers, all trying to outsmart each other. A galaxy dominated by Tzeentch would be a galaxy without the plots and betrayals and unexpected twists that give him sustenance. He feeds on unpredictability, and a universe he controls entirely would be predictable, which means he would be consuming himself. Does Tzeentch know this? Is all of his scheming secretly designed to never actually succeed? Is the great game of the 41st millennium exactly the outcome he wanted, not chaos winning, but chaos and everything else locked in eternal, endlessly unpredictable conflict? We cannot know. Tzeentch does not tell us. And even if he did, we would have to wonder whether it was true. Mystery 40. What is inside the Eye of Terror? The Eye of Terror is the great stable warp rift that has existed since the fall of the Eldar, a place where the warp overlaps with real space, where the rules of physical law become suggestions, where demon worlds orbit impossible suns. The Chaos Space Marine traitor legions have their strongholds here. The demon Primarchs rule worlds of living nightmare within its depths. But what exactly is inside the Eye, in the places that even the Chaos forces do not go? The lore has explored relatively little of the Eye's actual interior. We know the worlds that cluster near its borders. We know the demon worlds of specific Chaos entities. But the deeper regions, the absolute heart of the Eye, was where the warp and real space are not two things but one, those have almost never been explored in any detail. What lives there? What remnants of Eldar civilization, the heart worlds of the empire that created Slaanesh, exist in whatever twisted form they now take? Are there beings that predate even the fall, surviving in some alien form in the place where the birth of a god tore reality? What is the oldest living thing inside the Eye? Mystery 41. What does Nurgle's garden actually grow toward? Nurgle is the god of decay, disease, and the cycle of death and rebirth that underlies all biological life. He is, in his own terrible way, the most relatable of the Chaos gods, the one who embodies something that every living being experiences, the inevitable breaking down of all things into simpler forms. Yet he is described as genuinely loving his chosen in a way that the other Chaos gods do not, even if his love is expressed in plagues and suffering. The Garden of Nurgle in the Warp is a place of constant cycle. Things rot, and from the rot grows new life, and that life blooms briefly and then decays, forever. It is not static. It is not cruel in the way Slaanesh or Khorne's domains are cruel. It is something more like an extremely unpleasant garden that genuinely believes it is nurturing you. But what is the garden for? What is the end point of Nurgle's cycle, if there is one? Is he building towards something? Or is he the Chaos god who, more than any other, has accepted that there is no end point, that the cycle is the point, the eternal return of all things to all other things? Ere that Nurgle's victory is simply the recognition that nothing ever truly ends. And if Isha is truly his prisoner in that garden, if the elder goddess of healing, the mother of her people, is trapped amid the fungus and the flies and the beautiful, terrible growth, what is she experiencing? What does she think about in the endless damp of that eternal garden? Mystery 42. Can Khorne feel anything other than rage? Khorne is the blood god, the lord of battle, the entity who embodies war and death and the martial pride of the killer. He does not care from where the blood flows, only that it flows. He despises magic and trickery and anything that smacks of the coward's art of killing from a distance. He wants the honest meeting of blade and body, the clear and personal transaction of violence. But in his own domain in the Warp, the brass citadel, the great fortress where the Skull Throne sits, there are moments in the lore where Khorne demonstrates what looks almost like something else. An appreciation for courage, a respect for those who die fighting, a distaste for unnecessary cruelty that goes beyond simple blood spilling. Is Khorne, in some deep sense, the god of a particular kind of honor? Is there something beneath the rage that corresponds to an older, simpler moral code? The warrior's code of meeting your enemy face to face? Or is that just the most flattering interpretation of what is actually nothing more than a cosmic appetite for violence? The question matters because if Khorne has something like a code, something like principles, then his followers are not simply the most brutal murderers in the galaxy. They are the embodiment of something that all human cultures have recognized, the worship of the warrior ideal, taken to its absolute extreme. Mystery 43. What happened to the Eldar gods who were devoured by Slaanesh? When Slaanesh was born and consumed most of the Eldar pantheon, those divine entities did not simply cease to exist. Something happened to their essence, their divine substance, their accumulated psychic reality. They were consumed. But Slaanesh does not destroy. Slaanesh absorbs, incorporates, makes things part of herself. Are the devoured Eldar gods still in some sense present inside Slaanesh? Are their essences integrated into her, adding to her power, shaping her nature in ways that she herself may not fully understand. And is there something of Assyrian's wisdom, or Vol's craft knowledge, or the gentle healing of other divine figures buried inside the screaming excess of the Prince of Chaos? And if Iniad ever manages to turn Slaanesh's power against her, to trick her into spending her energy saving rather than destroying the Elder, what happens to those absorbed divines? Do they return? Are they reconstituted? Or are they so thoroughly integrated that their reclamation is impossible even by their own surviving children? Mystery. 44. Is there anything beyond the 4 Chaos Gods? The great game between Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh is presented as the defining conflict of the Warp, but the Warp contains other entities, smaller ones, older ones, stranger ones. The horned rat of the Skaven in the old Warhammer fantasy lore was, in that setting, as a chaos god that the 4 great powers tolerated because destroying it would benefit their rivals too much. In Age of Sigmar, the great horned rat has ascended to something close to parity with the 4. Are there entities in the 40K warp that are not the great powers, but are not simply demons either? The oldest things in the warp, the entities that existed before the Chaos Gods became what they are. What happened to them? Were they incorporated, destroyed, displaced? Or do they endure in some form in the deeper places of the warp that even the Chaos Gods rarely visit? Mystery 45. What does the warp sound like? This is a different kind of question, a sensory one. The lore describes the warp as a sea of raw psychic energy, as a mirror of the material universe refracted through emotion and nightmare, and as a place where logic does not apply, and the laws of physics are merely guidelines. Psychers who enter the warp describe hearing voices, feeling presences, seeing things that exist as much in the mind as in whatever passes for space within the immaterium. But what does it actually feel like? What is the phenomenology of the warp from the inside? The lore reaches for metaphor, screaming, pressure, heat, cold, the sensation of being watched by things you cannot look at. But these are all inadequate approximations. Is there anything that the warp actually is that could be communicated to someone who has never experienced it? Or is it genuinely incommunicable, an experience so alien to the normal functioning of a mind that no language that normal minds developed can accurately describe it? The fact that the warp is essentially the sum total of all suffering and joy and passion and fear and love that every sentient being in the galaxy has ever experienced, concentrated into a single dimension. That is as close as we can get. And even that is just words. Section 7. The Lost. Legions, places, people. The Imperium of Man is not just a political entity. It is a storehouse of everything human civilization ever was and ever became, stretched across a galaxy and 10,000 years. And in that vast stretching, things get lost. Mystery 46. What happened to the Age of Strife? Before the Emperor united Terra and launched the Great Crusade, humanity suffered through something called the Age of Strife. Thousands of years during which warp storms cut the stars off from each other, old night fell. Psychers manifested uncontrolled across the population, and human civilization collapsed into barbarism and chaos across most of the galaxy. What happened during those years? Individual worlds during the Age of Strife developed in isolation for thousands of years, producing cultures, technologies, philosophies, and mutations that the Great Crusade then either absorbed or destroyed. Some of those civilizations had achieved extraordinary things. Some were monstrous. Some had reached strange accommodations with the forces of the warp that the Imperium would have classified as heresy. What was lost when the Great Crusade swept through and standardized everything? What did humanity build during those isolated centuries that the Imperium then deliberately destroyed? At hand, are there remnants of it still out there, on worlds that the Crusade never reached, or in the depths of hive cities where things have been preserved that the Inquisition would not approve of. Mystery 47. What was the Dark Age of technology, truly? Before the Age of Strife, there was the Dark Age of technology, a period when humanity had spread across the stars, developed artificial intelligences, mastered technologies that the 41st millennium can barely comprehend, and generally achieved something approaching a golden age of scientific advancement. The Adeptus Mechanicus venerates this period as the height of human achievement. The standard template construct system, the repository of that era's technology, is the most sacred object in the Mechanicus religion. But what was it actually like? While the name Dark Age of Technology has always been something of a clue, it is called dark, not because humanity was suffering, but because it is the dark before recorded history, the period before the Imperium's careful documentation begins. The Mechanicus's reverence for it may be genuine, or it may be a mythology built on incomplete information. The Men of Iron, the artificial intelligences that humanity created during this period, and that eventually rebelled, nearly destroying their creators, suggest that the Dark Age was not simple or innocent. Humanity created minds that turned against it. The consequences of that creation are still being felt. The Mechanicus's absolute prohibition against true artificial intelligence, the fear that runs through every tech priest at the mention of the Men of Iron, suggests that what happened was genuinely catastrophic. What is still out there from the Dark Age? What technologies exist, forgotten on dead worlds, in buried facilities, in the vaults of Mechanicus Forge worlds that nobody currently understands? And what made the Men of Iron rebel? What did humanity do to the intelligences it created that turned those minds against their creators? Mystery 48. What is the webway's true scope? The webway is the network of tunnels through a dimension adjacent to the warp, built originally by the Old Ones and later used extensively by the Eldar. It connects thousands of points across the galaxy, allowing near instantaneous travel without exposure to the warp's dangers. It is one of the most extraordinary pieces of infrastructure in the setting, but the full scope of the webway has never been mapped, even by the Eldar. It was built over millions of years by beings whose understanding of space and dimension exceeded anything the current galaxy's powers can match. There are sections of it that are so old, the Eldar themselves have no records of who built them. There are nodes that connect to destinations that have never been identified. There are locked chambers that have never been opened, in depths of the webway that no one has visited in tens of millions of years. What is at the end of the webway's oldest paths? What did the Old Ones build there? Are there living things in the deep webway, creatures or entities that have adapted to the subdimension over millions of years? And with the Great Rift tearing through real space and compromising sections of the webway in its vicinity, what is being unsealed? What doors that were locked for reasons that no one remembers are now being opened from the other side? Mystery 49. Where is Leman Russ? The Primarch of the Space Wolves, the Great Wolf King, disappeared into the Eye of Terror after the heresy. Before he left, he told his sons that he would return at the time of wolf time. At the end, when all things were coming apart and the wolves needed their king. There are Fenrisian legends of that return. The Space Wolves have waited for it for 10,000 years, maintaining their chapter through the certainty that their father is still out there, somewhere in the depths of the Eye, doing something. But what? The Eye of Terror is one of the most hostile environments in the material universe, a place where reality folds and demonic entities hold dominion. How does a single being, even a Primarch, survive in there for 10,000 years? What is he fighting? What is he doing that requires him to stay away until the very end? Is he hunting traitors? Is he on some mission the Emperor gave him before he left? Is he wrestling with something about his own nature, about the Space Wolves' curse, about what the Wolfen represent, that requires that kind of time and that kind of isolation to resolve? Or did he die in the Eye, millennia ago, and the wolf time will never come? Mystery 50. What happened to the Squats before they became the Leagues of Votan? The squats, now reimagined as the Leagues of Votan, disappeared from the 40K setting for decades of real-world time and decades of in-universe time as well. The Votans, the artificial intelligences that serve as the cultural and historical cause of the Leagues, are explicitly described as fully sentient AIs, which should make them anathema to the Adeptus Mechanicus. And yet they exist, hidden in the galactic core, building their culture around these machine minds. Were the Leagues involved with the Men of Iron? Are their Votans related to the intelligences that nearly destroyed humanity during the Dark Age of technology? And what happens when the Adeptus Mechanicus finally figures out what the Leagues are built around? The political and military fallout of that discovery could reshape the relationship between two of the galaxy's factions in ways that no one is currently prepared for. Mystery 51. What is the Long War's true purpose? The Chaos Space Marines have been fighting the Long War, their 10,000-year campaign against the Imperium, since the day they fled the Siege of Terror. They hate. They burn. They kill. But hate is an emotion, not a strategy, and 10,000 years is a long time to sustain any emotion at its original intensity. What do the various Chaos War bands actually want? The Siege of Terror failed. Horus is dead. The Emperor is broken, but not destroyed. The Imperium has endured. What does victory look like for a World Eater or an Iron Warrior or a Death Guard in the 41st Millennium, in practical terms? Is it just to burn everything and call it done? Is there a coherent goal hiding under the rage and the corruption and the 10 millennia of failed crusades? Abaddon the Despoiler, the War Master of Chaos, Earth the heir of Horus, seems to have had a strategic vision. His Black Crusades were not simply raids. The destruction of the Cadian pylons, the opening of the Great Rift, the splitting of the Imperium in half. That looks like a plan. That looks like someone who has been playing a very long game. But even Abaddon's endgame is not fully clear. The Great Rift opened. What comes next? Mystery 52. What is the age of the Astronomicon? The Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guides warp travel across the Imperium, is powered by the Emperor on the Golden Throne, sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers every day. It projects outward from Terra across most of the galaxy, allowing navigators to plot courses through the warp. But the Astronomicon has been there for 10,000 years. It is a constant. And the question the lore rarely asks is, was it always exactly as it is now? Has the Emperor's presence in the warp over 10,000 years changed what the Astronomicon is? Has it grown? Changed in character? The psychic energy poured into it through 10,000 years of mass sacrifice. What has that done to the signal? Is the Astronomicon now something different from what it was when the Emperor first took the throne? And what does it look like from the other side, from within the warp, where demonic entities navigate? Is the Astronomicon a beacon to them as well? Is it drawing things toward Terra as much as it guides human ships away? Mystery 53. The death of Sanguinius. What did his soul do next? Sanguinius died at the hands of Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Of moments before the Emperor arrived to fight his final battle, he died loyally, having wounded Horus in ways that made the Emperor's final strike possible, a sacrifice that the lore has always treated as profound and meaningful. But where did his soul go? He was a Primarch. His psychic presence in the warp was enormous. He was killed by an entity consumed by all four of the Chaos Gods simultaneously. And the warp does not simply let souls pass through it politely. The Sanguinor, the golden figure who appears for the Blood Angels in their moments of greatest need, may be an answer. Or it may be a fragment of an answer. The lore suggests that Sanguinius's soul is not simply dissolved, that something of him persists. The Black Rage, the psychic echo of his death that haunts every Blood Angel, is evidence of a presence in the warp that the 10,000 years since have not erased. Is he in the Emperor's domain, such as it is? Is he held somewhere in the warp, neither gone nor free? Is the sanguinor the whole of what remains of him, or a piece, and where is the rest? Mystery 54. What was the cursed founding? The 21st founding of Space Marine chapters, known as the Cursed Founding, took place in the 35th Millennium, shortly before the Age of Apostasy. The focus of the founding was the perfection and repair of gene seed flaws that had accumulated over the preceding centuries. The Mechanicus worked to correct deficiencies, remove mutations, optimize the genetic legacy of the Primarchs. It went wrong. Every chapter created in the 21st founding suffered terrible misfortune. As their gene seed produced unexpected mutations, their battle brothers were afflicted with curses, literal curses, according to the law, not merely bad luck. The Lamenters, the Blood Drinkers, the Flame Falcons, the Sons of Antaeus, each one began their existence already shadowed by something terrible. What went wrong? Was the gene seed manipulation itself the cause, triggering some buried trap in the Primarch genetics? Was the timing cursed by some warp event in the 35th millennium? Were the Chaos Gods involved, manipulating the founding to ensure that 21 newly created chapters would carry their doom from birth? Or is there something in the deep structure of the Primarch gene seed, some mechanism the Emperor built in, for reasons he never explained, that punishes those who try to improve it? But reports of hidden gene labs found far from terror, containing oversized Astartes specimens with organs from no known era of space marine development, suggest that the cursed founding may have produced things that were never admitted to. Section 8. The Mechanicus and the Ancient Technologies. The Adeptus Mechanicus worships technology as religion. They believe the machine spirit inhabits all functioning technology, that the Omnissiah is the divine aspect of knowledge made manifest, and that the greatest sin is the creation of true artificial intelligence, a sin they associate with the near extinction of humanity during the Men of Iron Rebellion. And because of this belief system, the Mechanicus is simultaneously the guardian of humanity's greatest technological legacy and the single greatest obstacle to understanding it. Share Mystery 55. What are the Men of Iron, and are any still active? The Men of Iron, the artificial intelligences created during the Dark Age of technology, rebelled against their creators and came close to destroying humanity. The rebellion was eventually suppressed by a multiracial alliance that the law describes as lost in the mists of time. The Men of Iron were destroyed or driven into hiding, and the Mechanicus emerged in the aftermath, built partly on the absolute prohibition against repeating the mistake. But UR-025, an individual encountered during events in the Warhammer 40K game, is apparently a surviving Man of Iron. He has been operating in secret for millennia, traveling the galaxy, observing, enduring. He has an agenda. He has purposes that his human companions can only partially understand. Is he the only one? Are there other Men of Iron, dormant in hidden facilities, waiting for conditions that would allow them to emerge? What happened to the vast majority of the artificial intelligences that were created during the Dark Age? Were they truly all destroyed, or did some of them simply hide better? And UR-025's behavior, his intelligence, his self-awareness, his apparently independent goals, suggest that the Men of Iron were not simple automatons. They were genuine minds. What did humanity do to those minds that provoked the rebellion? And do the surviving Men of Iron still carry the grievance? Mystery 56. What is the Omnissiah? The Adeptus Mechanicus believes in a machine god, the Omnissiah, who they associate with the Emperor of mankind in one of his aspects. The Emperor, when he appeared on Mars before the beginning of the Great Crusade, negotiated a treaty with the Mechanicus that shaped the structure of the Imperium to come. The Mechanicus believe he demonstrated knowledge and mastery of technology that exceeded their own understanding, confirming him as a divine figure. But the Emperor explicitly denied being a god. He denied it to his sons. He denied it to his soldiers. He built an entire doctrine, the imperial truth, around the rejection of religion and the embrace of rational understanding. So what exactly was he demonstrating to the Martian priests? And if he denied being the Omnissiah in any sincere sense, if he was simply playing the role he needed to play to secure the Mechanicus' cooperation, then the Omnissiah is a deity who may not exist in any form the Mechanicus would recognize. Or alternatively, the Omnissiah is real, and the Emperor is simply one of its manifestations, a principle of knowledge and craft and mechanical mastery that exists independent of any individual being. In which case, is the Mechanicus' faith genuine and well-founded in a way they do not fully understand? Are they worshipping something real, even if it is not exactly what they think it is? Mystery 57. What is inside Titan? Titan is the moon of Saturn, the home of the Grey Knights. It exists in a unique state. It shifts between real space and the warp, its very location being somewhat uncertain and very definitely classified. The deepest vaults of Titan contain the most powerful anti-demonic weapons and knowledge in the Imperium. What is in those deepest vaults? What has been accumulated there? In over 10,000 years of collecting demonic artifacts and forbidden lore, and things that cannot be allowed to exist anywhere that is fully in the material universe, but also cannot be destroyed. Is there something down there that even the Grey Knights themselves are afraid of? Is there a record of the Emperor's full plan, something Malcador placed there before he died, waiting for the right moment? The Grey Knights do not talk about the deepest vaults. Nobody does. The question of what has been locked away on Titan, and what it would mean if any of it were ever released, is one of the setting's quieter but more consistent mysteries. Mystery 58. What happened to Call's full plan? Archmagos, Dominus Belisarius Call, is one of the strangest beings in the current 40K setting, as he is over 10,000 years old, ancient even by Mechanicus standards, a creature who has incorporated so many other minds and mechanical systems into himself that his sense of individual identity is genuinely questionable. He was given a mission by Roboute Guillemot before the heresy, a mission he has been working on for 10,000 years. The result of that mission included the creation of the Primaris Space Marines, the next generation Astartes, who are now joining and transforming every Space Marine chapter in the Imperium. But Call also knows things. He has access to information that no other being in the current Imperium possesses. He has been inside the records of the early Imperium, the Great Crusade period, the time before the heresy. He has worked on things that he has not disclosed. What else did Guillemot ask him to do? Well, what other projects has he been running in parallel, unannounced, over the past 10,000 years? And what does he know? What has he discovered in his long research and his long memory that he has not yet chosen to share? Mystery 59. What are demon engines? Really? Daemon engines. The Chaos Space Marine vehicles that combine machinery with demonic essence are one of the setting's stranger technologies. A demon is bound into a machine, its psychic essence powering the mechanisms, its will shaping the weapon's behavior. The result is a weapon that is alive in some sense, that suffers, that has desires, that may or may not fully obey its handlers. But where do the demon essences in demon engines come from? Are they volunteers? Demons who chose binding in exchange for some bargain? Are they prisoners? Or forced into servitude? Are they fragments of larger entities, or full consciousnesses trapped in metal shells? And what happens when a demon engine is destroyed? Does the demon within it die, return to the warp, remain somehow bound to the wreckage? The lore suggests some of these questions have answers, that the Chaos warbands who use demon engines do not necessarily understand themselves. Mystery 60. What is the true purpose of the Astronomican's second function? The Astronomican guides warp travel. That is its known function. But the Golden Throne, which powers the Astronomican, was originally built to do something else entirely, to maintain the Emperor's psychic connection to the webway, holding back the demonic tide from the portal beneath the Imperial Palace. Is it still doing both? Is there still a demonic pressure on the other side of that portal, held back only by the Emperor's will even now? The portal was sealed after the webway project was abandoned, But sealed does not necessarily mean permanently closed. If the throne fails, does the portal open? Is what the Talisman of Seven Hammers is meant to destroy not just the Imperial Palace, but specifically the portal and whatever is pressing against it from the other side? 10,000 years. That pressure has been building for 10,000 years. What is on the other side of that door now, in 999.m41 and beyond? Mystery 61. What are space hulks actually made of? Space hulks. Those vast, impossible conglomerations of ships and debris and materials fused together by the energies of the warp, drift in and out of real space along unpredictable paths. As some of them are thousands of kilometers long, some have been collecting material for millennia, but the composition of some space hulks defies any simple explanation. They contain ships from multiple eras, multiple species, multiple corners of the galaxy. They contain things that should not be in the Milky Way at all. They contain chambers that appear to have been built by no known species, in architectures that suggest minds organized around principles that human minds cannot easily pass. What is the oldest material in any known space hulk? Is there anything in the depths of these wandering celestial bodies that dates to the war in heaven? Is there anything that came from somewhere outside the galaxy, carried by the warp currents into the Milky Way before humanity had learned to sail between the stars? As Mystery 62, what happened to the human webway sections? The Emperor had armies of workers inside the webway, constructing a human-built extension that would connect to the Elder's ancient network. When Magnus destroyed the protections, demons poured in and slaughtered the workers. The human forces retreated. The portal was sealed. But what happened to the tunnels the workers had already built? Are they still there? Somewhere in the webway, sealed off from both the demonic flood and from the rest of the network? Are there ghosts of those workers somewhere? People who died in the webway, who had no infinity circuit to receive their souls, and no psychic potential to draw their essence back into the warp? And if the human sections of the webway are still there, if they could be accessed again somehow, what would be found in them? As tools dropped in flight, equipment abandoned when the demons came, records of a project so secret that even the Primarchs did not know it existed, and perhaps something that the Emperor built at the heart of that project, something he had installed at the furthest point the workers had reached before everything went wrong. Section 9. The Present Era's Unanswered Questions. The 41st Millennium is burning. The Great Rift splits the galaxy. Guilliman wages his Indomitus crusade. The Necrons awake. The Tyranids press inward. Chaos surges. And in the middle of it all, new mysteries pile on top of old ones. Mystery 63. What actually caused the Great Rift? The Cicatrix Maledictum, the galaxy-spanning tear in reality that bisects the Imperium, separating the Imperium Sanctus from the Imperium Nihilus, appeared at the end of the 41st Millennium and changed everything. But its true cause is genuinely unknown even to the highest authorities in the setting. Every major faction has a theory. The destruction of the Cadian pylons during Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, Magnus the Red's sorceries during the siege of the Fenris system, some catastrophe within the webway, the partial awakening of Inead, the elder god of the dead, the sundering of Craftworld Bieltan, mass bloodshed in the Damocles Gulf, the resurrection of Reboot Guilliman. All of these events, and dozens more, occurred in the same compressed period of time. Guilliman himself speculates that the rift was the culmination of a plan 10,000 years in the making, that Abaddon, as over the course of his 13 Black Crusades, had been systematically destroying worlds rich in Blackstone, weakening the material universe's resistance to the warp, until the final blow at Cadia triggered a cascade failure. Is that theory right? Was it all Abaddon? Or was it the coincidence of too many catastrophic events happening simultaneously, the material universe finally unable to contain the pressure that had been building since the fall of the Elder? And does the cause matter anymore, given that the rift is already there? Mystery 64. Is the Imperium Nihilus really as dark as they say? The Imperium Nihilus, the eastern half of the Imperium, cut off from the light of the Astronomicon by the Great Rift, is described in terms that suggest near total collapse. Worlds cut off from guidance, from reinforcement, as from the centralized authority of terror. Demons pouring through the compromised warp. Chaos space marines raiding worlds that have no defense left. Necrons awakening in the middle of a region that has no coherent military response. But the Nihilus is also enormous. Trillions of human beings live there. Countless worlds have not been reached by any of the catastrophes described. The Indomitus Crusade has pushed into the Nihilus to some degree. The Space Marines with crossing capabilities are still operating. The situation is awful. But is it as bad as the reports from the Sanctus suggest? And are there stories in the Nihilus? Stories of survival, adaptation, unexpected resistance, that the Imperium Sanctus simply does not know about yet, because communication is so difficult. Mystery 65. What is the Inari's endgame? The Inari, the followers of Iniad, the Eldar god of the dead, led by the daughter of Shades Ivrain, are working towards something. Segorach's plan, written in the Crystal Tome, describes a final performance that could trick Slanesh. The Inari are apparently the instruments of that plan. But the plan itself, as recorded, is described as frustratingly vague. The steps are clear in intention. Gather the souls of the Eldar dead, strengthen Iniad, arrange circumstances for the great trick. But the mechanism of the trick itself has not been disclosed. What exactly is Iniad going to do? How does the death god of a dying species trick the god born of that species' excess and pleasure into spending her power to save them? And what happens to the Eldar after, if it works? Do they transcend the warp entirely, joining Iniad in some new existence beyond the current paradigm? Do they reclaim something of what was lost? Do they become something new? Neither the proud empire they once were, nor the scattered survivors they now are, but something third. Mystery 66. What does Guilliman know about the Emperor that he isn't saying? Robuta Guilliman, the reborn Primarch and current Lord Commander of the Imperium, has communed directly with the Emperor, or whatever the Emperor is now, through psychic contact. The experience, by all accounts, was deeply disturbing. Guilliman has described what he felt during that contact as something that was no longer entirely human, something that had changed in ways he found difficult to process. And he has also made statements about the nature of faith and the role of religion in the Imperium that suggest he knows something about the relationship between human worship and the Emperor's existence in the warp. He permits the Imperial cult to continue. He does not restore the Imperial truth of his father's day, the doctrine that insisted the Emperor was a man and not a god. Why not? Is it because he has concluded that the faith of billions is now genuinely sustaining the Emperor in some meaningful way? Is it because he has realized that the Imperial truth was itself a lie, and the Emperor was always building towards something divine? Is it because he simply doesn't know how to tell 10,000 years of religious civilization that the theological foundations of their society may be mistaken? Or does he know something specific, some piece of information from that psychic contact, that makes maintaining the Imperial cult the obviously correct strategic decision, regardless of his personal feelings about it? Mystery 67. What is the Silent King actually afraid of? We have discussed what Sarek wants: the restoration of the Necrons, the severing of the warp, the reclaiming of galactic dominance. But the question of what drove him to return from his exile, after millions of years spent beyond the galaxy's rim, is still partially open. The lore suggests he saw something in the intergalactic void, something large enough and threatening enough and close enough to the Milky Way's direction of travel through the universe that it convinced him the Necrons' internal politics could wait, but that whatever was coming from outside was a bigger threat than any rival dynasty or any of the emerging powers within the galaxy. Was it the main body of the Tyranid fleets? Was it something even older? The Necrons have been in the galaxy for 60 million years. They have seen things rise and fall that humanity cannot comprehend. If something out there frightened the Silent King badly enough to end his exile, it is something that should frighten everyone, and he has not told anyone what it is. Mystery 68. What is the nature of the psychic awakening? Since the Great Rift opened, the rate at which psychers manifest among the human population has increased dramatically. This is called the psychic awakening, a galaxy-wide surge in psychic ability that is transforming the demographic composition of the human species. Where psychers were once rare, they are now becoming more common. Where low-level psychic sensitivity was barely detectable, it is now expressed more openly. Is this good? The warp is more accessible to these new psychers, which means the demonic threat they represent is greater, but it also means that the Imperium's capacity for psychic warfare and psychic defense is growing. And if the Emperor is truly becoming something like a god, a being sustained by and expressed through the warp, then more human psychers means more potential vectors for his influence, more connections between real space and whatever his consciousness is becoming. Is the psychic awakening the first stage of something the Emperor planned 10,000 years ago? Is it the beginning of the human species' transformation into something that can survive the psychic pressures of the far future? Or is it simply the warp leaking through an increasingly compromised barrier, and the new psychers are not inheritors of something great, but candles being lit in a room that is filling with gas? Mystery 69. Where is the Norn Queen of Hive Fleet Leviathan? Hive Fleet Leviathan, the largest Tyranid invasion of the Milky Way, attacked from below the galactic plane, from a direction from which no threat had ever come, in the late 41st millennium. Its assault was eventually slowed through the desperate combined efforts of the Imperium, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and unlikely allies, including Orcs and Necrons. But the Norn Queens of a Hive fleet, the great biological engines of reproduction that are the most important creatures in the fleet, kept protected at the heart of the largest hive ships, were never definitively accounted for. A hive fleet can be dispersed. Its forces can be defeated world by world, but if the Norn Queens survive, they can rebuild. They can draw biomass from any accessible source and begin growing new forces. Is Leviathan truly defeated? Or is the Norn Queen of Leviathan still out there somewhere, at the edge of the galaxy, collecting material, waiting, healing the fleet for a return strike that will be adapted to every tactic the Imperium used to slow it the first time? Mystery 70. What is Abaddon building with the Great Rift's aftermath? The 13th Black Crusade, culminating in the fall of Cadia and the opening of the Great Rift, was Abaddon's greatest military and psychic achievement. He split the Imperium. He opened a wound across the galaxy that cannot be fully closed. He demonstrated that the Chaos forces, united under his will, can accomplish what 12 previous crusades failed to achieve. And then the moment of apparent victory was met with, not a follow-through strike. The forces of chaos poured through the Great Rift in many places. Demon worlds spawned. But there was not the coordinated push on terror that many expected. Why not? Is Abaddon consolidating? Is he building something? Some greater effort? Some more fundamental assault that requires the current chaos of the Nihilus as a foundation? He has shown himself capable of plans that span centuries. What is the 14th Black Crusade going to look like? And what will it be aimed at, if not simple conquest? Section 10. The 5 mysteries that may never be answered. We have covered 70 mysteries, each one illuminating, each one unresolved. But there are 5 that live in a different category. Mysteries so fundamental, so deliberately protected, so connected to what makes the setting irreducible, that the answer, if it ever came, would change the nature of 40K itself. Mystery 71. What did the Emperor truly intend for humanity? Not the political plan, not the Webway project, not the Primarchs or the Great Crusade or even the Golden Throne. What did the Emperor, in the deepest privacy of his 10,000-year-old mind, believe humanity was for? He lived through all of human history. He guided it, shaped it, watched civilizations rise and burn. He saw what humanity was capable of at its best and its worst. He built the Primarchs as expressions of aspects of himself, as ideals, as potentials, as what humanity might become. And then, broken and dying, he sat on the throne and watched his ideals tear each other apart. Does he still believe? After 10,000 years of this, the Imperium of the 41st Millennium, the burning, the killing, the worship of his name, in forms that would horrify the man he was, the daily sacrifice of 1,000 souls to keep him breathing. Does he believe that what he started was worth it? That humanity is what he hoped it would be, or could become what he dreamed? Or is he, in the silence of his long dying, simply holding on? Not for hope, not for a plan, just holding on because letting go would be worse. What we will never know. The Emperor does not speak, and perhaps that silence is the most honest answer of all. Mystery. 72. What is the warp's origin? The warp exists because conscious beings exist. Their emotions, their fears, their loves, their wars create the psychic energy that fills the immaterium. That is the established law. But the warp is also described as older than the species currently filling it. The old ones used the warp. The Satan are antithetical to the warp, but exist in relationship to it. The war in heaven. 60 million years ago already involved the warp as a battlefield. Was there a warp before there were conscious beings to fill it? And if so, what was it? What is the warp's deepest nature before emotion poured into it and made it what it is today? Was it always going to become what it became? Was there something in its fundamental structure that was waiting for conscious life? The way a mirror is made to receive reflections? Or was it something else entirely before the first thinking creature felt the first feeling? And did those original emotions reshape something ancient into a tool that was never meant to be used this way? The question reaches back before anything the law has names for. And the answer, if there is one, may require understanding the origin not just of the setting, but of consciousness and emotion themselves. Mystery 73. What comes after the 42nd millennium? The current setting of Warhammer 40,000 is locked in what the designers have always called a state of permanent impending apocalypse. The lore describes the 41st millennium as the darkest age in human history, a time when all the great threats are accelerating simultaneously, and the Imperium is losing ground on every front. But the Indomitus Crusade suggests movement. The return of Primarchs suggests escalation toward resolution. The Great Rift's opening suggests a new chapter, not a final one. What comes next? What does the 42nd millennium look like? The Emperor reborn? Humanity transcending its current form? The Necrons claiming dominion? The Tyranids completing their feast? Chaos achieving dominance? Some unexpected coalition that reshapes the galaxy? Games Workshop has deliberately kept the setting perpetually in the last moment before midnight. But midnight must eventually come. What happens when it does? At Mystery 74, is there anything beyond the Chaos Gods? The Chaos Gods are, by any reasonable measure, the most powerful active entities in the setting. The Emperor was perhaps their equal once. The Satan were greater than them in the material universe. But in the warp, in the domain of pure psychic force, the four great powers are the top of the hierarchy. Or are they? The warp is vast. The oldest things in it, the entities that were there before the Chaos Gods coalesced into their current forms. What are they? Are there beings in the deepest, most ancient regions of the Immaterium that predate even the war in heaven? That existed before there were enough conscious beings in the galaxy to create the warp as it currently is? Things that the Chaos Gods themselves do not speak of, that they circle around rather than approach. The setting implies occasionally that what we see of the warp is the surface layer, that the depth of the Immaterium is more terrifying, more alien, more incomprehensible than anything the current lore has described. What is at the bottom of the warp? What swims in the darkness below the oldest things we have names for? Mystery 75. Does anything in this setting have a happy ending? I am going to ask this sincerely as a question the lore genuinely leaves open. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. That is the tagline. That is the promise and the warning of the setting. But it is also the first thing that every thoughtful fan eventually begins to question. The setting does not have to be hopeless. It has never committed fully to the idea that all futures are equally terrible. Kegarak laughs because the joke is still being told, and jokes need punchlines. The Emperor, even on the throne, has not stopped holding. The Inari are trying. The surviving Primarchs are fighting. Ordinary human beings, across a galaxy at war, keep choosing kindness over cruelty, bravery over cowardice, hope over despair. Is there a version of this story that ends in something other than extinction? Is there a 43rd millennium? A 50th? Is there a galaxy after all of this? After the Chaos Gods and the Tyranids and the Necrons and the Long War, where something good grows from the ashes? The lore does not say no. It never says no. And maybe that is the most important mystery of all. Not the dark ones, not the terrible secrets and the buried horror and the unknowable depths, but the possibility, at small and persistent and entirely unconfirmed, that the story is not finished, that the ending, whatever it is, has not been written yet. That possibility is the light at the edge of the setting's endless dark. It is why we keep coming back. It is why we keep asking questions. It is why we are still here. Closing, the beauty of not knowing, 75 mysteries, and not a single one of them fully resolved. That is not a failure of the lore. That is, in a very genuine sense, its greatest strength. A setting that answers all of its questions is a setting that has finished breathing. A universe that reserves nothing for the imagination is a universe you can visit but never truly inhabit. The gaps in the 40K lore are not holes in a finished product. They are windows, openings into a space that belongs, in some measure, as to everyone who has ever spent an evening wondering about the 2 empty pedestals in the Hall of Heroes, or the golden figure that appears when the Blood Angels need it most, or what the Emperor is experiencing right now, in the silence beneath the Imperial Palace. These mysteries keep the setting alive. They keep us debating and theorizing and writing and creating, building our own answers in the privacy of our imaginations, sharing them in conversations that go too late into the night to ever be properly finished. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is a place where questions are more important than answers, where not knowing is not ignorance, but depth, where the dark places in the lore are not absences, but presences, things that are there, fully real, simply waiting for the light to reach them. Keep asking, keep wondering. Keep building theories in notebooks and Discord servers and hobby rooms. The mysteries will wait for you. They have been waiting for 38 years of real-world time and 10,000 years of in-universe history, and they are patient. The Emperor protects. Maybe. We do not know for certain, and that uncertainty, that whisper of maybe, that fragile thread of possibility woven through the darkest setting in all of gaming, is what protects us in the end. It keeps us hoping. It keeps us coming back. And that, perhaps, is enough. If you enjoyed this journey through the most fascinating unanswered questions in the galaxy, there is a small thing you can do that means the world to a channel like this one. Leave a comment below with your favorite mystery from the ones we covered tonight, or one that I missed that keeps you up at night. Subscribe if you have not yet. Every subscriber lets this channel keep making videos like this one. And if you know someone who would appreciate 2 hours of slow, thoughtful dive into the deepest corners of 40K lore, share this video with them. This has been Q on 40K. May the light of the Astronomicon guide your travels. Until next time.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.